Dust swirled across the parched dirt road as Katherine Collins dropped to her knees, her throat burning with thirst and her legs trembling from exhaustion after walking 5 miles already with at least 7 more to go before reaching the town of Wickenburg, Arizona. The year was 1883, and her father's worsening fever had left her no choice but to make the journey on foot after their only horse had gone lame the previous week. Katherine wiped sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her faded cotton dress, once blue but now a pale, sun-bleached shadow of its former color. At 23, she had already endured more hardship than most women twice her age. Her mother had passed from consumption 3 winters ago, leaving Katherine to care for her father and their small homestead 10 miles outside of town. Just a short rest, she whispered to herself, finding shade beneath a scraggly mesquite tree. The August heat was merciless, waves of it rising from the dusty ground. She took a careful sip from her canteen, rationing the precious water that remained. Katherine's thoughts drifted to her father, John Collins, lying feverish and delirious in their small cabin. The infection in his leg from a farming accident had worsened despite her attempts to treat it with poultices of the herbs her mother had taught her to use. Without proper medicine from Dr. Wilson in town, she feared the worst. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her from her worried thoughts. Katherine instinctively tensed, her hand moving to the small knife concealed in the pocket of her dress. The Arizona territory could be dangerous for a woman alone. A tall figure on horseback appeared through the heat haze, the silhouette of a cowboy atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. As he drew closer, Katherine could make out his features. A strong jawline partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble, piercing eyes shaded by a worn Stetson and broad shoulders that spoke of a life of hard work. "Madam," he called out, slowing his horse, "you all right out here?" Not the safest place to be resting alone. Katherine straightened her back, summoning what dignity she could. "I'm fine, thank you, just catching my breath before continuing to town." The stranger studied her face, noting the worry etched there and the exhaustion in her posture. "That's a mighty long walk in this heat. The name's Ethan James," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "If you don't mind my asking, what business has you walking all this way?" Katherine hesitated, eyeing the stranger cautiously. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, his manner direct but not threatening. After a moment's consideration, she decided honesty was her best course. "My father's ill with infection. I need to fetch medicine from Dr. Wilson in Wickenburg. Our horse went lame last week, so I've no choice but to walk." Ethan James frowned, glancing at the merciless sun overhead. "That's another 7 miles at least, madam. In this heat, that's not just difficult, it could be deadly." "I don't have many options, Mr. James," Katherine replied, a hint of pride in her voice despite her circumstances. Ethan dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. He was taller than Katherine had realized, standing over 6 feet with the kind of lean strength that came from years of hard work. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Katherine Collins. Most call me Kate." Ethan nodded, seeming to make up his mind about something. "Miss Collins, I'd like to offer you a ride into town. I'm headed that way myself, and my horse ranger here is strong enough to carry us both." Katherine eyed him warily. She had been raised to be cautious around strangers, particularly men she encountered on the road. Yet there was something in Ethan's direct gaze that inspired trust, and the thought of 7 more miles in the blistering heat was becoming increasingly daunting. "I couldn't impose," she began, but Ethan shook his head. "It's no imposition. Would be poor manners to leave a lady to walk all that way when I've a perfectly good horse." He paused. "Your father needs that medicine, and he needs it quick from the sounds of it." The mention of her father's condition broke through Katherine's hesitation. "Thank you, Mr. James." "I accept your offer." Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his weather-beaten face. "Just Ethan is fine." He led Ranger closer and interlaced his fingers to create a step for her. "May I?" Katherine nodded, placing her hand on his shoulder for balance as she stepped into his cupped hands. With surprising gentleness, he boosted her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her with practiced ease. "Hold onto the pommel there," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. Katherine was acutely aware of his presence, the solid warmth of him at her back, the clean scent of leather and sunshine that seemed to cling to him. As they set off toward Wickenburg at a steady trot, Katherine found herself relaxing slightly despite the unusual intimacy of their arrangement. "What brings you to these parts, Mr. Ethan?" "Ranch work, mostly," he replied, guiding Ranger around a rocky patch in the road. "I've been working at the Triple C Ranch for about 6 months now. Foreman there is a fair man, pays decent wages. Before that, I was up in Colorado, and before that, Texas." "You move around quite a bit," Katherine observed. Ethan was quiet for a moment before responding. "Never found a reason to stay in one place too long. The West is big, and I reckon I've always been looking for something, though I couldn't tell you what." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic movement of the horse lulling Katherine into a sense of security she hadn't expected to feel with a stranger. "Tell me about your father," Ethan said eventually. "What happened to him?" Katherine sighed. "He was clearing a new section of our land when his axe slipped. The cut wasn't too deep, but it got infected. I've done what I can with what we have, but—" Her voice trailed off. "You live just the two of you then?" Ethan asked. "Yes, since my mother passed 3 years ago, we have a small homestead about 10 miles east of town. It's not much, but it's ours." Ethan nodded, though Katherine couldn't see it. "It's good land around here if you can get water to it. We have a creek that runs through the north corner of our property. It's small, but it's been reliable, even in dry years." They crested a small rise, and the town of Wickenburg came into view in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. "There it is," Ethan said. "We should be there in less than an hour." Katherine felt a surge of relief. Had she been walking, she would still be hours away with the worst heat of the day yet to come. "I can't thank you enough for this, Ethan." "No thanks needed," he replied simply. "Anyone would have done the same." Katherine thought that wasn't necessarily true. She'd encountered plenty of people in her life who wouldn't have given a second thought to a woman struggling along the road. As they approached the outskirts of Wickenburg, the signs of civilization became more apparent. A weathered sign welcomed visitors to the town, established in 1863 after the discovery of gold in the nearby Bradshaw Mountains. Though the gold rush had died down, Wickenburg remained an important stop for the stagecoach lines and a supply center for the surrounding ranches and homesteads. Ethan guided Ranger down the main street, past the general store, the assayer's office, and the Silver Dollar Saloon, where piano music spilled out into the afternoon air. A few townspeople nodded in greeting as they passed. "Dr. Wilson's office is just ahead," Katherine pointed out, indicating a modest building with a sign identifying it as the office of Jeremiah Wilson, M.D. Ethan reined Ranger to a stop in front of the doctor's office and dismounted before helping Katherine down. The brief contact of his hands at her waist sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach, which she quickly dismissed as merely the relief of having reached her destination. "I'll tie Ranger here and come in with you," Ethan said, securing the horse to the hitching post. "That's not necessary," Katherine began, but Ethan had already finished with the horse and was holding the door open for her with a slight smile. "I know it's not, but I've come this far, might as well see it through." The interior of Dr. Wilson's office was cool and smelled of carbolic acid and herbs. A middle-aged man with spectacles and thinning hair looked up from a ledger as they entered. "Miss Collins," he greeted her with a nod. "What brings you to town today?" "It's my father, Dr. Wilson. The cut on his leg has infected badly. He's feverish and there's red streaks moving up from the wound." Dr. Wilson's expression grew serious. "Blood poisoning, likely. How long has he been showing these symptoms?" "The fever started yesterday evening. The red streaks appeared this morning." The doctor nodded, already moving toward his medicine cabinet. You're right to come quickly. He'll need laudanum for the pain, carbolic acid for cleaning the wound, and I have a new sulfa powder that's proven effective against such infections. He gathered various bottles and packets as he spoke. Katherine hesitated, her hand moving to the small purse tied at her waist. I can pay for some of it now, but for the rest, I'd need to arrange credit until our harvest comes in. Dr. Wilson's movements slowed slightly. He was a kind man, but he had a practice to maintain. The sulfa powder is expensive, Miss Collins. I had it shipped from back east. Before Katherine could respond, Ethan stepped forward. How much for everything the lady needs, Doc? Dr. Wilson calculated quickly. $8 for all of it, including extra bandages and a tincture to bring down the fever. Katherine's eyes widened. $8 was more than she had expected, more than they could easily spare with the uncertainty of their harvest still ahead. I'll cover it, Ethan said simply, reaching into his pocket and counting out the bills. Mr. James, I can't accept, Katherine protested, but Ethan shook his head. You can and you will. Your father needs this medicine now, not after you've sorted out credit arrangements. Doctor. Wilson, sensing the tension, busied himself with packaging the medicines and writing out detailed instructions for their use. When he was finished, he handed the package to Katherine. Clean the wound thoroughly with the carbolic solution first. Then apply the sulfa powder directly to the infected area before bandaging. Give him the laudanum for pain as needed, but not more than the dosage I've written down. The willow bark tincture will help with the fever. Katherine nodded, carefully placing the precious medicines in her basket. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. As they stepped back into the harsh sunlight outside, Katherine turned to Ethan, her expression a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. $8 is a substantial sum. I insist on repaying you. Ethan's blue eyes held hers steadily. Let's get your father well first. Then we can discuss repayment, if you still feel it's necessary. Katherine recognized the gentle but firm tone that brooked no argument. At least let me buy you a meal before we head back. You must be hungry after your journey. A smile touched the corners of Ethan's mouth. Now that's an offer I won't refuse. Thompson's Cafe makes a fine stew if you've got the time. The mention of time reminded Katherine of her father waiting in his sickbed. I should get back as soon as possible. One quick meal won't make much difference, and you'll need your strength for tending to him, Ethan reasoned. Besides, Ranger could use a bit of rest and water before the return journey. Recognizing the wisdom in his words, Katherine agreed. Thompson's Cafe was a small, clean establishment a few doors down from the doctor's office. Inside, the aroma of beef stew and fresh bread made Katherine suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd eaten. They settled at a small table by the window, and a plump woman in an apron approached with a friendly smile. Ethan James, haven't seen you in town for a spell, and Miss Collins, what a pleasant surprise. Hello, Mrs. Thompson, Katherine greeted her. We'd like 2 bowls of stew, please, and some of your corn bread if you have it. Coming right up, dears, Mrs. Thompson said, bustling away. You seem to know everyone, Ethan observed. Katherine smiled slightly. In a town this size, it's hard not to. My mother and I used to come in every other Saturday for supplies and church on Sundays when she was well enough. Their food arrived promptly, steaming bowls of hearty stew filled with chunks of beef, potatoes, and carrots, accompanied by thick slices of corn bread glistening with honey butter. Katherine realized just how hungry she was as she took her first bite. You mentioned your mother passed 3 years ago, Ethan said after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. That must have been difficult. Katherine nodded, her eyes focused on her bowl. Consumption. It was slow, which was both a blessing and a curse. We had time to say goodbye, but watching her fade away. She trailed off, then took a deep breath. My father took it hard. They were devoted to each other. He's never been quite the same since. And you've been taking care of him and the homestead all this time. Someone had to, Katherine said simply. What about your family? You mentioned moving around a lot. A shadow seemed to pass over Ethan's features. Lost my parents in a cholera outbreak when I was 16. My older brother and I worked our way west after that, but we parted ways in Kansas when he decided to join the Army. Last I heard, he was stationed at Fort Laramie. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly. Ethan shrugged, but his eyes held old pain. It was a long time ago. I've made my own way since then. They finished their meal, and Ethan insisted on paying despite Katherine's protests. As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, the afternoon was beginning to cool slightly, though the sun still beat down relentlessly. We should get moving if we want to reach your homestead before dark, Ethan said, untying Ranger from the post where the horse had been enjoying some shade and water. Katherine nodded, suddenly apprehensive about the return journey. It would mean another hour or more of close proximity to this man, who had shown her such unexpected kindness, a man whose presence affected her in ways she wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging. They mounted up as before, with Ethan's hands steady and respectful as he helped her into the saddle. As they rode out of town, Katherine found herself noticing details she had missed on their arrival: the way Ethan adjusted his posture to ensure she was comfortable, the gentle manner in which he handled his horse, the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. The journey back seemed quicker somehow, perhaps because the worst of the day's heat had passed, or perhaps because Katherine was no longer consumed by worry now that she had the medicine her father needed. The landscape was beautiful in the slanting afternoon light, the saguaro cacti casting long shadows across the dusty ground, the distant mountains tinged with purple and gold. "It's beautiful out here, isn't it?" Ethan remarked, as if reading her thoughts. "Different from the forests of Colorado or the plains of Texas, but it has its own kind of magic." "Yes," Katherine agreed. "I used to resent it when I was younger, the heat, the isolation, the hardship, but there's something about this land that gets under your skin. I can't imagine living anywhere else now." "Your homestead, what do you grow there?" Ethan asked. "We have 20 acres under cultivation, mostly corn and beans, some wheat. We keep chickens and a few goats for milk and cheese. We had 2 horses, but like I mentioned, one went lame last week and the other—" She sighed. "Well, the other was stolen 3 months ago. Times have been tough." Ethan's jaw tightened at the mention of the stolen horse. "Did you report it to the sheriff?" "Yes, but he said there wasn't much he could do. Horse thieves are common enough, and they're usually long gone before anyone notices." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Katherine pointed to a small trail branching off from the main road. "That's our turn there. It's about 2 miles up that path." Ethan guided Ranger onto the narrower trail, which wound through stands of mesquite and palo verde trees before opening onto a small valley. A modest cabin came into view, smoke rising thinly from its stone chimney. Beyond it, fields of corn stretched toward a line of cottonwood trees that marked the creek Katherine had mentioned. "You've kept it up well," Ethan observed as they approached. "Good fencing, roof looks sound." "My father built most of it with his own hands," Katherine said, a note of pride in her voice. "We've tried to maintain it as best we can, though it's been harder with just the 2 of us." As they drew closer, the front door of the cabin opened, and a young man of about 17 stepped out, a rifle held cautiously in his hands. When he recognized Katherine, he lowered the weapon, relief evident on his face. "Kate, thank goodness. Mr. Collins has been asking for you." Katherine slid from the saddle as soon as Ethan brought Ranger to a stop, grabbing her basket of medicines. "How is he, Daniel?" The young man, clearly a neighbor who had been watching over her father, shook his head. "No better. The fever's still high. I've been giving him water when he's conscious enough to take it." Katherine turned to Ethan, who had dismounted and was standing respectfully a few paces back. "This is Mr. Ethan James. He offered me a ride to town and back. Ethan, this is Daniel Peters. His family's homestead is about 3 miles from here." Daniel nodded to Ethan, still holding the rifle. "Appreciate you helping Miss Collins, sir." "It was no trouble," Ethan replied, sizing up the young man who was clearly protective of Katherine. Katherine was already moving toward the cabin. I need to see to my father. Daniel, would you mind seeing to Mr. James's horse? He must be thirsty after the long ride. Of course, Daniel agreed, though he cast another cautious glance at Ethan before leading Ranger toward the small barn. Inside, the cabin was neat but sparsely furnished, with a large fireplace dominating one wall. A curtain separated the main room from what appeared to be a sleeping area, and it was toward this that Katherine hurried. Ethan followed at a respectful distance, stopping at the curtain as Katherine pushed past it. John Collins lay on a narrow bed, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored. He was a big man, though illness had clearly taken a toll, with gray streaking his once dark hair and deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes. "Pa," Katherine said softly, sitting beside him and taking his hand. "I'm back. I've brought medicine from Dr. Wilson." John's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "Katie, that you girl?" "Yes, Pa, I'm going to clean your wound now and give you something for the pain and fever. It might hurt a bit." John nodded weakly, his gaze drifting past Katherine to where Ethan stood in the doorway. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Katherine glanced over her shoulder. "That's Ethan James. He gave me a ride to town and back. I'd still be on the road without his help." John studied Ethan through fever-bright eyes. "Thank you for helping my daughter, mister." Ethan stepped forward slightly, removing his hat. "Just doing what anyone would, sir. Your daughter was determined to get you that medicine." A faint smile touched John's lips. "Stubborn like her mother, that one." His eyes closed again, the brief conversation having exhausted his limited strength. Katherine turned back to her father, setting out the medicines Dr. Wilson had provided. "I need to clean and dress his wound," she said to Ethan. "Would you mind fetching some fresh water from the well? There's a bucket just outside the front door." "Of course," Ethan replied, glad to have a useful task. Outside, he found the well a short distance from the cabin. As he was drawing up the bucket, Daniel approached from the barn. "Ranger's been watered and I gave him some grain," the young man said. "Fine animal." "Thank you," Ethan replied, hauling up the bucket of cool water. "You've been looking after Mr. Collins while Katherine went for medicine," Daniel nodded. "My pa sent me over when we heard Mr. Collins had taken ill. The Collins family has always been good to us. Kate taught my sister to read last winter when the school was closed due to the snows." Ethan carried the water back to the cabin, Daniel following. Inside, they could hear Katherine speaking softly to her father as she tended to him. "I should be getting back to our place," Daniel said. "Pa will be wondering. Will you be staying, Mr. James?" The question held a note of concern, and Ethan understood the young man's protective instinct toward Katherine and her father. "Just long enough to make sure they're settled, then I'll head back to the ranch." Daniel seemed satisfied with this answer. "Tell Kate I'll come by tomorrow to check on them, and if she needs anything, she just needs to send word." After Daniel left, Ethan brought the water to Katherine, who was carefully cutting away the bandage from her father's leg. The wound beneath was angry and inflamed, with ominous red streaks extending upward from it. "Thank you," Katherine said, taking the bucket. "Could you hold his shoulders? This will be painful and he might try to pull away." Ethan positioned himself at the head of the bed, gently but firmly gripping John's shoulders as Katherine began to clean the wound with the carbolic solution. John groaned and tried to pull his leg away, but Ethan spoke soothingly to him, keeping him steady as Katherine worked. "You've done this before," Katherine observed, noticing Ethan's competent assistance. "I've had my share of injuries on the trail," Ethan replied, "and I've helped friends through worse." Once the wound was cleaned, Katherine sprinkled the sulfa powder over it and applied a fresh bandage. She then measured out a dose of the laudanum and mixed it with water, carefully helping her father drink it. "That should help with the pain and let him rest," she said, standing up and stretching her back. "Now we wait and see if the medicine does its work." Ethan followed Katherine back into the main room of the cabin. Dusk was falling, casting long shadows through the small windows. Without being asked, Ethan set about building up the fire while Katherine lit several oil lamps. "You should eat something," Ethan said, noticing how tired she looked. Katherine ran a hand over her face. "I should see to Ranger first, make sure he's been properly cared for after carrying us all that way. Daniel took care of him, said he gave him water and grain." Katherine nodded, moving to the small kitchen area where she began to slice bread and cheese. "Are you hungry? It's not much, but I can offer you something to eat before you head back." Ethan looked out the window at the darkening sky. "It's getting late. The trail back to the main road wouldn't be safe in the dark." Katherine paused in her preparations, suddenly realizing the position she had put him in. "I didn't think. Of course you can't leave now. You're welcome to stay the night. We have a small guest room. It's little more than a storage space with a cot, but it's better than riding in the dark." "I don't want to impose," Ethan said, though the thought of riding all the way back to the ranch in the dark was not appealing. "It's not an imposition. It's the least I can do after all your help." Katherine brought the simple meal to the table. "Please sit." They ate in companionable silence, both tired from the long day. When they had finished, Katherine checked on her father again, finding him sleeping more peacefully, his breathing less labored. "The laudanum is helping him rest," she said, returning to the main room. "I'll need to check his fever through the night." "I could take a shift," Ethan offered. "You need rest too." Katherine hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'll show you the guest room and then I'll sit with him for a few hours. I could wake you at midnight." The guest room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow cot that occupied most of the space. Boxes and trunks were stacked against one wall, and a tiny window provided the only ventilation. "It's not much," Katherine apologized. "It's fine," Ethan assured her. "I've slept in far worse places." Katherine showed him where he could find water for washing, then retreated to her father's room. Ethan sat on the edge of the cot, removing his boots and gun belt. Through the thin wall, he could hear Katherine moving about, speaking softly to her father. There was something deeply touching about her devotion, her determination to make the long journey to town on foot rather than wait another day for help. Despite his fatigue, sleep eluded Ethan. His mind kept returning to the woman in the next room, her courage, her independence, the quiet dignity with which she faced her challenges. He had met many women in his travels, but few had affected him as Katherine Collins had in just one day. True to her word, Katherine woke him at midnight, gently touching his shoulder. "Ethan, it's your turn to watch." He sat up immediately, fully alert. "How is he?" "A little better, I think. His fever seems to have gone down slightly. I've written down when he should have his next dose of medicine." She handed him a slip of paper. "Wake me if there's any change." Ethan nodded, taking the paper. "You get some rest now." Katherine's room was on the other side of her father's, and Ethan heard her soft footsteps as she retreated there. In the small bedroom, John Collins slept fitfully, occasionally muttering words Ethan couldn't make out. Ethan dampened a cloth and placed it on the older man's forehead, then settled into the chair beside the bed to begin his vigil. Around 2 in the morning, John became restless, his fever seeming to rise again. Ethan checked Katherine's instructions and administered another dose of the willow bark tincture, helping the semi-conscious man to swallow it. After a while, John settled again, his breathing becoming more regular. Ethan found himself studying the man's face, seeing traces of Katherine in the shape of his jaw and the set of his brow. There were photographs on the small table beside the bed, a younger John with a pretty, dark-haired woman who must have been Katherine's mother, and another of Katherine as a young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, her smile carefree in a way that her current smile was not. The night passed slowly, but Ethan didn't mind. There was a peaceful quality to the darkened cabin, the only sounds being John's breathing and the occasional call of a night bird outside. When the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the window, Ethan heard movement in the main room and stepped out to find Katherine stirring the embers in the fireplace. "You should have woken me earlier," she said when she saw him. "You've been up all night." "I'm used to it," Ethan replied. "Besides, your father's been resting fairly well. His fever rose a bit in the night, but the willow bark tincture seemed to help." Katherine nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Let me check on him, and then I'll make us some breakfast." While Katherine tended to her father, Ethan stepped outside to care for Ranger. The early morning air was cool and fresh, the sky beginning to lighten in the east. The Collins homestead looked different in the dawn light, smaller perhaps, but also more welcoming, with its neat fields and carefully maintained buildings. When he returned to the cabin, Katherine was preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and coffee. "He's better," she said as soon as Ethan entered. "The fever's down and the redness around the wound has decreased. The medicine is working." Ethan smiled, genuinely pleased at the news. "That's good to hear." They ate breakfast together, discussing what needed to be done for the day. Katherine mentioned chores that had been neglected during her father's illness, and Ethan found himself volunteering to help before he had even thought about it. "You've already done more than enough," Katherine protested, but Ethan shook his head. "I'd like to help. Besides, I've got the day off from the ranch, was planning to spend it in town anyway." Katherine studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you. There are some repairs to the chicken coop that I haven't had time to get to, and the corn needs checking for pests." They spent the morning working side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. Ethan repaired the chicken coop while Katherine tended to her father and prepared another dose of medicine. Later, they walked through the corn fields together, checking the plants for signs of damage or disease. "The crop looks good," Ethan observed. "Should be a decent harvest." "We're hoping so," Katherine replied. "We need a good yield this year. The last two were below average due to the drought." As they worked, they talked. Katherine told Ethan more about her life on the homestead, about her dreams of expanding their cultivation to include a small orchard of apple trees. Ethan spoke of his travels, of the beauty he had seen in the mountains of Colorado and the vastness of the Texas plains. By midday, John was awake and alert enough to take some broth. The improvement in his condition was remarkable, and Katherine's relief was palpable. "The doctor said to continue the treatment for at least 5 days," she told Ethan as they ate a simple lunch of beans and cornbread. "But if he continues to improve at this rate, I think he'll be fine." After lunch, Ethan reluctantly mentioned that he should be getting back to the ranch. "The foreman will be wondering where I am, and I've got work tomorrow." Katherine nodded, understanding but unable to hide her disappointment. "Of course. You've already stayed much longer than you needed to." They walked together to where Ranger was tethered, the horse looking refreshed after his night's rest. Ethan checked the saddle girth and adjusted the stirrups, aware of Katherine standing quietly nearby. "I want to thank you, Ethan," she said finally. "Not just for the ride or the medicine, but for everything. Your kindness has meant a great deal." Ethan turned to face her, struck anew by the quiet strength in her face, the gentle curve of her mouth, the way the sunlight caught in her brown hair. "It was my pleasure, Katherine, truly." An awkward moment passed between them, neither quite knowing what to say next. Then Ethan cleared his throat. "I'd like to come back if that's all right. Check on how your father's doing." Katherine's eyes brightened. "We'd like that. Perhaps Sunday, if you're not working, you could join us for dinner." "Sunday it is," Ethan agreed, a smile spreading across his face. He mounted Ranger, tipping his hat to Katherine. "Take care of yourself, Katherine Collins. I'll see you soon." As he rode away, Ethan found himself already looking forward to Sunday, already planning to ask for the day off from the ranch. There was something about Katherine Collins that made him want to return, something that made the idea of settling in one place seem less daunting than it had before. Katherine watched him go, standing in the yard until horse and rider disappeared from view. Only then did she turn back to the cabin, to her father, to the tasks that awaited her. But as she worked through the afternoon, her thoughts kept returning to Ethan James, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Sunday suddenly seemed very far away. The next few days passed in a blur of activity for Katherine. Her father continued to improve, able to sit up by Thursday and even stand briefly on Friday, though the wound on his leg was still tender. Katherine changed the bandages regularly, applying the sulfa powder as doctor. Wilson had instructed and watched with relief as the angry redness gradually subsided. Daniel Peters visited as promised, bringing fresh bread from his mother and offering to help with any heavy chores. Katherine thanked him but found herself declining his assistance more firmly than she might have before. The truth, which she was reluctant to acknowledge even to herself, was that she was saving those tasks for Ethan's visit on Sunday. On Saturday afternoon, as Katherine was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart quickened, thinking perhaps Ethan had decided to come early. But it was Daniel again, this time accompanied by his father, Jacob Peters. "Afternoon, Kate," Jacob called as they dismounted. He was a stocky man with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. "Thought we'd stop by and see how John's doing." "He's doing much better, thank you," Katherine replied, setting down her basket of eggs. "He's even talking about trying to walk to the porch tomorrow if the weather's good." Jacob nodded approvingly. "That's good to hear. Say, Daniel mentioned you had some help the other day, a cowboy from one of the big ranches." Katherine felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "Yes, Ethan James. He works at the Triple C. He was kind enough to give me a ride to town when I needed medicine for Pa." Jacob and Daniel exchanged a glance that Katherine couldn't quite interpret. "Well, that was decent of him," Jacob said finally. "Those ranch hands can be a rough lot sometimes." "Ethan's not like that," Katherine said, perhaps too quickly. "He was a perfect gentleman." Another exchanged look between father and son, then Jacob cleared his throat. "Actually, Kate, we came by for another reason. Our cousin Sarah is arriving from Boston next week. She's a widow looking for a fresh start out here. We're having a small gathering to welcome her next Saturday, and we'd like you and John to come if he's well enough." Katherine smiled, genuinely pleased at the invitation. "That sounds lovely. I'm sure Pa will be strong enough by then if he continues to improve." What Jacob said next, however, caught her off guard. "Daniel was thinking he might come by and escort you if that's agreeable." Katherine glanced at Daniel, who was studying the ground, a slight flush visible beneath his tan. She had known, of course, of his interest in her. It had been evident for some time in his frequent visits and eager offers of assistance. But until now, the Peters family had never been so direct about it. "That's very kind," Katherine said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to put Daniel to any trouble. We can manage the ride over." "It's no trouble at all," Daniel said quickly, looking up at last. "I'd be happy to do it." Caught in a social bind, Katherine nodded. "Thank you then." "That would be fine." After the Peters men left, Katherine sat on the porch step, troubled by the encounter. Daniel was a good young man, hardworking and kind. A year ago, she might have welcomed his attention, seen it as a practical solution to the challenges of maintaining the homestead alone with her aging father. But now, the thought of encouraging him felt dishonest. Because her thoughts were filled with someone else, someone with blue eyes and a quiet smile, someone who had appeared in her life just days ago but had somehow changed everything. Sunday dawned clear and bright, with a hint of autumn crispness in the early morning air. Katherine rose earlier than usual, taking extra care with her appearance. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had said brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and pinned her hair more carefully than was her habit for everyday work. John noticed, of course. "You're looking mighty fine this morning, Katie," he observed from his chair by the window, where Katherine had helped him settle after breakfast. "Any particular reason?" Katherine busied herself straightening the already neat room. "I always dress for Sunday, Pa, you know that." John's eyes twinkled knowingly. And it wouldn't have anything to do with that cowboy who's coming to dinner, would it?" "Ethan's just being neighborly, checking on your recovery," Katherine replied, not meeting her father's gaze. "It's the least we can do to offer him a good meal in return." Of course, John agreed, but the smile didn't leave his face. Just being neighborly. Katherine escaped to the kitchen where she had been preparing since dawn. A chicken was roasting in the oven, filling the cabin with its savory aroma. She had made fresh bread the day before and picked the last of the summer berries for a cobbler. It was more elaborate than their usual fare, but Katherine told herself it was simply proper hospitality. Around noon, the now familiar sound of hoofbeats announced Ethan's arrival. Katherine smoothed her dress and took a deep breath before going to the door. Ethan looked different, somehow freshly shaven, his dark hair damp as if recently washed, wearing a clean shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He carried a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Afternoon, Katherine," he greeted her, his smile warming his eyes. "You look lovely." Katherine felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Thank you, you look well yourself. Please come in." Pa's eager to thank you properly. Inside, John Collins struggled to rise from his chair, waving off Katherine's protest. "I can stand to greet a guest in my own home," he insisted. Ethan stepped forward quickly, offering his hand. "Please, sir, don't trouble yourself on my account." John shook Ethan's hand firmly. "It's no trouble. Besides, I need to look a man in the eye when I thank him for saving my life." "I didn't do much," Ethan said modestly. "Your daughter did all the hard work. I just provided the transportation." "And paid for the medicine," John added. "Which reminds me we need to settle that debt." Ethan shook his head. "There's no hurry about that, sir." "Maybe not, but I don't like owing debts." John gestured to a chair. "Sit down, young man. We can discuss it after dinner." Katherine excused herself to finish preparing the meal, and Ethan sat with John, the two men quickly falling into conversation. From the kitchen, Katherine could hear them discussing the upcoming harvest, the condition of the range lands, the recent drop in beef prices. Her father seemed more animated than he had been in months, engaged in the kind of substantive discussion he had missed during his illness. When she called them to the table, Ethan insisted on helping John to his seat despite the older man's protests. The meal was a success, the conversation flowing easily among the three of them. Ethan told stories of his travels that had them all laughing, and John shared tales of the early days in Arizona Territory before the railroad had come through. After the berry cobbler had been served and enjoyed, John leaned back in his chair with a contented sigh. "Best meal I've had in a long time, Katie. You've outdone yourself." "It was wonderful," Ethan agreed. "Thank you for inviting me." John turned to Katherine. "Why don't you show Ethan around the place while I rest a bit? I'm still not up to much walking, but there's no reason he shouldn't see what we've accomplished here." Katherine recognized her father's transparent attempt to give her time alone with Ethan, but she couldn't bring herself to object. "If you're sure you'll be all right, Pa, I'm fine. Got my book right here and I'm feeling better by the day thanks to that medicine." John fixed his gaze on Ethan. "You go on with Katie. She can show you the orchard site she's always talking about." Outside, the afternoon sun cast a golden light over the homestead. Katherine led Ethan past the barn and chicken coop toward the creek that marked the northern boundary of their property. Tall cottonwood trees lined the bank, their leaves beginning to turn yellow with the approach of autumn. "This is where I want to plant the apple orchard," Katherine said, gesturing to a gentle slope leading down to the creek. "The soil is good here and there's plenty of water. My mother always wanted fruit trees." Ethan surveyed the area with a professional eye. "It's a good spot. Protected from the worst of the winds, plenty of sunshine." "Have you ordered saplings yet?" Katherine shook her head. "Not yet. I need to save a bit more first, and there's the matter of preparing the ground properly." They walked along the creek, talking about the practicalities of establishing an orchard, about the challenges and rewards of farming in this arid land. It was easy conversation, comfortable, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. "Oh," Ethan said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "I almost forgot. I brought something for you." He handed her the small brown paper bundle he had been carrying. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to find a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. How did you know I like poetry?" She asked, genuinely surprised. "I noticed you had a few books of verse on your shelf," Ethan admitted. "This one's fairly new. I thought you might not have it yet." Katherine was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, I don't have this one. Poetry is." It was something my mother and I shared. She taught me to read with poetry books. They had reached a large boulder beside the creek, and Katherine sat down, motioning for Ethan to join her. The sound of the water flowing over rocks was soothing, the autumn sunlight warm on their faces. "Tell me about your mother," Ethan said. "Your father mentioned she was quite a woman." Katherine smiled, memories washing over her. "She was, strong but gentle too. She came from back East Philadelphia, met my father when he was there on business. She gave up a comfortable life to come out here with him and build something from nothing." "Like mother, like daughter," Ethan observed quietly. Katherine glanced at him, then back at the creek. "I suppose so, though I've never known any other life. This has always been my home." "Do you ever think of leaving, seeing other places?" The question caught her by surprise. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I used to dream of going to San Francisco or even back east to see where my mother grew up. But then she got sick, and after she passed, Pa needed me here." She paused. "What about you? All that traveling, have you found what you're looking for yet?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze following the path of the creek. "I'm not sure I knew what I was looking for until recently." Something in his voice made Katherine look at him, really look at him. He met her gaze, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Katherine," he began, then hesitated. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel." The sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever Ethan had been about to say. They both looked up to see Daniel and Jacob Peters riding toward them along the creek. Katherine stood quickly, smoothing her dress. Ethan rose more slowly, his expression carefully neutral as the two riders approached. "Afternoon, Kate," Jacob called. "Hope we're not interrupting." "We were out checking our fence line and thought we'd stop by to see how John's doing." "He's doing much better," Katherine replied, aware of the awkwardness of the situation. "He's resting inside at the moment." Jacob's gaze moved to Ethan, assessing. "You must be James. Daniel mentioned you gave Kate a hand the other day." "That's right," Ethan said, stepping forward to offer his hand. "Ethan James." Jacob shook his hand briefly. "Jacob Peters, this is my son Daniel. We farm the property to the north." Daniel nodded stiffly but didn't offer his hand. "Sir." An uncomfortable silence fell. Katherine, feeling the tension between the men, spoke quickly. "Ethan joined us for Sunday dinner to check on Pa's recovery." "That's neighborly of you," Jacob said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "You work at the CCC, I hear." "Yes, sir. Been there about 6 months now. Just passing through then." There was a hint of challenge in Jacob's question. Ethan's gaze flickered briefly to Katherine before returning to Jacob. "I haven't decided yet." Another silence, heavier this time, then Jacob cleared his throat. "Well, we should be getting on. Got those fence repairs to finish before dark. Kate, remember what we discussed about Saturday?" "Yes, of course," Katherine said, forcing a smile. "I'll talk to Pa about it once he's a bit stronger." After the Peters men had ridden away, the easy atmosphere between Katherine and Ethan had disappeared. They walked back toward the cabin in silence, the moment by the creek broken beyond repair. At the door, Ethan stopped. "I should be heading back too. I've got an early start tomorrow." Katherine nodded, disappointed but understanding. "Thank you for coming, and for the book." Ethan hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but then simply nodded. "Thank your father again for the meal. I'll try to stop by next week to see how he's getting on." As Katherine watched him ride away, she felt a sense of loss disproportionate to their short acquaintance. Something had been building between them, something precious and unexpected, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the Peters interruption had changed its course. Inside, her father was awake, watching her with knowing eyes as she entered. "Everything all right, Katie?" Katherine managed a smile. "Yes, Pa, everything's fine. The Peters stopped by briefly on their way home." John nodded slowly. "I see, and Ethan had to get back to the ranch." Katherine busied herself clearing the dinner dishes, avoiding her father's perceptive gaze. "He's a good man, I think," John said carefully. "Straightforward, respectful." "Yes," Katherine agreed softly. "He is." The week that followed was busy with harvest preparations. John continued to improve, able to walk short distances with the aid of a cane by Wednesday. He insisted on helping with small tasks, frustrating Katherine with his stubbornness, but also relieving her to see him regaining his strength. Daniel visited twice, once bringing tools to help repair a section of fence, the second time staying for supper at John's invitation. Katherine was polite but distant, aware of her father watching the interaction with thoughtful eyes. Saturday arrived, and with it the planned visit to the Peters farm to welcome their cousin from Boston. Katherine dressed carefully, choosing a green dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. It was more formal than her usual attire, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. John, dressed in his Sunday best, leaned on his cane as they waited for Daniel to arrive. "You don't have to go through with this if you don't want to, Katie," he said suddenly. Katherine looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean, Pa?" "I mean this business with Daniel Peters." John's eyes were kind but direct. "He's a fine young man and the Peters are good neighbors, but if your heart's elsewhere, it's not fair to lead him on." Katherine felt her cheeks flush. "I've never encouraged Daniel to think. I know that," John interrupted gently. "But Jacob has his mind set on joining our properties through marriage, and Daniel is clearly willing. I just want you to know that you have a choice. Your mother and I never believed in arranged marriages. We wanted you to marry for love when the time was right." Before Katherine could respond, they heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Daniel had brought the Peters' larger wagon rather than riding, making it easier for John to travel. The gathering at the Peters farm was larger than Katherine had expected. Several families from surrounding homesteads were present, as well as the minister from Wickenburg and his wife. Sarah Peters, the widowed cousin, was a small, delicate woman with a gentle manner and sad eyes that spoke of recent grief. Throughout the afternoon, Katherine found herself watching the road, half hoping to see a familiar rider approaching. But Ethan didn't appear, and she chided herself for the disappointment that settled in her chest. As the afternoon wore on, Jacob Peters called for everyone's attention, raising his glass in a toast to his cousin. After welcoming Sarah to Arizona, he turned to Katherine and her father with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "While we're all gathered here, I'd like to take the opportunity to announce some happy news," he said. "My son Daniel has asked for permission to court Miss Katherine Collins, and John has graciously consented." Katherine froze, her glass halfway to her lips as all eyes turned to her. Across the room, her father looked equally stunned, his brow furrowed in confusion. Daniel stepped forward, taking her hand. "I know this is sudden, Kate, but I've admired you for a long time. I believe we could build a good life together, joining our farms and our futures." Katherine's mind raced. She had never agreed to this, nor had her father given any consent that she knew of. But to contradict Jacob publicly would humiliate Daniel and create a rift with neighbors they relied upon. I'm honored by your regard, Daniel," she managed to say, carefully extracting her hand from his. "But I think we should discuss this privately, another time." A murmur ran through the gathered guests. Jacob's smile tightened, and Mrs. Peters looked distinctly uncomfortable. John Collins thumped his cane on the floor, drawing attention to himself. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, Jacob. While I certainly hold Daniel in high regard, I don't recall giving consent to any formal courtship. That's a decision for Katie to make, when and if she's ready." The tension in the room was palpable. Jacob's face darkened, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention to the windows. Outside, 3 riders had arrived, the sheriff from Wickenburg and 2 deputies. One of the deputies was helping a 4th man dismount, a man whose hands were bound. "What in the world?" Jacob muttered, moving to the door. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Harker, nodded to Jacob. "Sorry to interrupt your gathering, Peters. We're on our way back to town with a prisoner and thought we'd stop for water if you don't mind." "Of course," Jacob replied, though he looked less than pleased at the disruption. "Who have you got there, horse thief?" the sheriff replied. "Caught him trying to sell stolen stock in Prescott. Got quite a collection of brands on the animals he had, including one that belongs to John Collins, if I'm not mistaken." Katherine and her father exchanged a glance. The horse that had been stolen months ago, could it possibly be recovered? The commotion drew the party outside, where the deputies were securing the prisoner to a hitching post while they watered the horses. The thief was a scrawny man with shifty eyes and a sullen expression. And behind the sheriff's party, riding alone on a familiar chestnut stallion, was Ethan. Katherine's heart leaped at the sight of him, then faltered as she remembered the awkward situation she had just left inside. Ethan dismounted, nodding to the sheriff before his eyes found Katherine in the crowd. "Miss Collins," he said, approaching her and her father. "Sheriff Harker told me they'd recovered a horse with your brand. I thought you might want to see if it's yours before they take it to town." "Thank you, Ethan," John said warmly, shaking his hand. "That's thoughtful of you." Katherine couldn't seem to find her voice, too aware of Daniel watching them with a stiff expression, of Jacob's calculating gaze moving between her and Ethan. One of the deputies led forward a bay mare, and John exclaimed in recognition, "That's our Sadie, all right." "Look, Katie, she's even got that white splash on her left hock." The sheriff approached them. "If you can provide proof of ownership, Mr. Collins, you can claim her now rather than coming to town later." "I've got the bill of sale in the house," John replied. "Katie, would you fetch it from my desk drawer?" Grateful for the excuse to escape the tension, Katherine hurried inside. As she retrieved the document from her father's desk, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Daniel in the doorway. "Is it true, Kate?" he asked, his voice strained. "Do you have feelings for that cowboy?" Katherine sighed, wishing this conversation could happen anywhere but here at this moment. "Daniel, I'm sorry about what happened in there. Your father had no right to make that announcement without speaking to me first." "That's not an answer," Daniel pressed, stepping closer. "I've made no secret of my feelings for you. We've known each other for years. Our farms adjoin. It makes sense for us to marry, to build something together. Marriage should be about more than convenience or combining property," Katherine said gently. "You deserve someone who loves you completely, Daniel, and I care for you as a friend, but you've fallen for a drifter who happened to give you a ride to town," Daniel finished bitterly. "A man who'll probably move on as soon as the season changes, leaving you heartbroken." Katherine straightened, stung by his words but recognizing the hurt behind them. "I don't know what the future holds for me or for Ethan. But I do know that I need to follow my heart, just as you should follow yours." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded stiffly. "I understand. I won't trouble you again." He turned to leave, then paused. "Just don't come looking for help when he rides away and leaves you alone." After he left, Katherine leaned against the desk, the bill of sale clutched in her hand, fighting back tears. This was not how she had wanted things to unfold, but perhaps it was better to have the truth out in the open. When she returned outside, the situation had evolved further. Her father was showing the sheriff the bill of sale, while Jacob Peters was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Ethan. "Don't know what your intentions are, coming around the Collins place, but Kate's spoken for," Jacob was saying as Katherine approached. Ethan's expression remained calm, though she could see tension in his shoulders. "I believe that's for Miss Collins to decide, sir." "Ethan," Katherine said, coming to stand beside him, "thank you for bringing news about our horse." Ethan's eyes softened as they met hers. "It was no trouble. I was in Wickenburg when the sheriff brought the thief in. When I recognized the brand as yours, I thought you'd want to know right away." Jacob looked from one to the other, his mouth tightening. "I see how it is. Well, I won't stand in the way if you're determined to make a mistake, Kate. But don't come crying to us when this saddled tramp moves on to greener pastures." With that, He stormed back toward the house, calling for his family to follow. The gathering broke up in confusion, guests departing hastily, sensing the tension but not fully understanding its cause. The sheriff, having completed the paperwork to return Sadie to the Collins family, tipped his hat to them. "We'll be moving on to town now. Glad you got your horse back, John." Once the sheriff's party had departed, Katherine, her father, and Ethan were left standing alone in the Peters' yard, an awkward tableau of uncertainty. "Well," John said finally, breaking the silence, "this has been quite an afternoon. I suppose we should head home." "I can drive you," Ethan offered. "You're still not up to riding and Katherine can lead Sadie." John looked between them, a slight smile touching his lips. "That would be most helpful, thank you, Ethan." The ride back to the Collins homestead was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Katherine rode beside the wagon, occasionally reaching out to stroke Sadie's neck, reassuring herself that the mare was really back where she belonged. At the cabin, Ethan helped John down from the wagon while Katherine led Sadie to the barn. By the time she had settled the mare in her stall with fresh hay and water, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. She found Ethan on the porch, waiting for her. John had gone inside, giving them privacy that Katherine was both grateful for and nervous about. "It's been quite a day," Ethan said as she approached. "I'm sorry if I caused problems for you with the Peters family." Katherine shook her head. "You didn't cause anything. There was already a misunderstanding brewing." She took a deep breath. "Jacob announced that Daniel wanted to court me, claiming my father had already given his consent." Ethan's expression darkened. "Had he?" "No, Pa was as surprised as I was." Katherine leaned against the porch railing, suddenly tired. "The Peters have been good neighbors and Daniel is a decent man, but you don't love him," Ethan finished softly. Katherine looked up at him, finding his blue eyes intent on her face. "No, I don't." A moment of silence stretched between them, full of unspoken words and questions. Then Ethan moved closer, his voice low and earnest. "Katherine, I know we haven't known each other long, and I know my life has been unsettled. I've never stayed in one place more than a year since I was 16, but something's changed since I met you." Katherine's heart quickened. "What's changed? Everything." Ethan took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "For the first time, I'm thinking about putting down roots, building something lasting. I've been talking to the Triple Seaticus owner about buying a small parcel at the south end of his property. Land with water rights, good grazing, not far from here." Katherine stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You're staying in Wickenburg." "I want to," Ethan said, "but I need to know if I have a reason to." He paused, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "If there's any chance that you might feel for me what I've come to feel for you." "And what is that exactly?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "I believe I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Collins. I know it's fast and I know it might seem foolish, but I've learned to trust my instincts, and everything in me says you're the woman I've been searching for without even knowing it." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "It terrifies me how quickly it's happened, but I can't deny it." Ethan's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "May I call on you properly? Court you the way you deserve to be courted?" Katherine nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes. I'd like that very much." Ethan leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Katherine met him halfway, their lips coming together in a sweet, gentle kiss that held the promise of many more to come. The weeks that followed were the happiest Katherine could remember since before her mother's illness. Ethan came to dinner every Sunday, sometimes bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from the mercantile, a packet of seeds for her vegetable garden, once a delicate silver hairpin that must have cost him a week's wages. John Collins recovered fully, though he still used a cane on days when his leg troubled him. He watched the courtship between his daughter and Ethan with approving eyes, often finding excuses to give them privacy while still maintaining the proprieties that the times demanded. Ethan was true to his word about putting down roots. He purchased 20 acres from the Triple C Ranch, land that bordered a year-round creek similar to the one on the Collins property. It was good land with possibilities, and Katherine found herself drawn into his plans and dreams for it. Relations with the Peters family remained strained, though Daniel eventually nodded to Katherine when they passed in town, a silent acknowledgement that he had accepted her decision. Jacob was less forgiving, but Katherine hoped that time would heal the breach between neighbors who needed each other's goodwill to survive in this demanding land. As autumn deepened toward winter, Ethan became a fixture at the Collins homestead, helping with the harvest, repairing the roof before the winter rains, and beginning work on Katherine's long-dreamed-of apple orchard. He ordered saplings from a nursery in California, planning to plant them in the spring. On a crisp December evening, with the scent of pine boughs decorating the cabin for Christmas, Ethan asked Katherine to marry him. They were sitting by the fire after dinner, John having retired early, claiming fatigue but obviously giving them time alone. "I love you, Katherine Collins," Ethan said, kneeling before her chair and taking her hands in his. "I want to build a life with you, to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. Will you marry me?" Katherine's heart felt too full for words. She nodded, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Ethan slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept all these years." Katherine touched it reverently. "It's beautiful, and it means even more knowing it was hers." They were married on New Year's Day, 1884, in the small church in Wickenburg. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by friends from town and surrounding homesteads. Even Daniel Peters came, arriving late and sitting at the back, but offering a genuine handshake to Ethan afterward and a gentle kiss on Katherine's cheek. "Be happy, Kate," he said before departing. "That's all I ever wanted for you." Katherine and Ethan divided their time between the Collins homestead and Ethan's new property, working to improve both with an eye toward eventually joining them through land purchases in between. John insisted they take the main bedroom in the cabin, moving himself to the smaller room that had been Katherine's. In the spring, they planted the apple orchard together, Katherine's long-held dream finally taking tangible form. As they placed the last sapling into the ground, Ethan put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "What do you think? Will they bear fruit by the time our children are old enough to climb trees?" Katherine leaned into his embrace, her free hand resting on her abdomen where the first signs of new life were just beginning to show. "I think they might," she said, smiling up at him, "though we'll have to wait about 7 months to meet our first little orchard climber." Ethan's eyes widened, then filled with joy as her meaning became clear. "You're certain?" Katherine nodded. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have a baby in late October." Ethan lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around until they were both laughing breathlessly. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I never thought I could be this happy," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Nor I," Katherine admitted. "When I set out that day to fetch medicine for Pa, I never imagined I'd find so much more than I was looking for." Ethan kissed her tenderly. "A journey of miles that led straight to my heart," he murmured against her lips. In the years that followed, the apple orchard flourished, as did the James family. Their son, William, was born on a stormy October night in 1884, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years later. John Collins lived to see both his grandchildren and several harvests of apples from the orchard, before passing peacefully in his sleep in 1889. Ethan and Katherine eventually realized their dream of connecting their properties, creating one of the most prosperous homesteads in the area. They were known for their hospitality, their hard work, and their devotion to each other, A love story that began with a simple act of kindness on a dusty road and grew into a legacy that would endure for generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Katherine would take out the book of poetry Ethan had given her during those first days of their acquaintance and read aloud to him. Favorite verses that spoke of hope, of love, of journeys begun and destinations found. Of two lives that had intersected against all odds, brought together by circumstance, but bound by something far stronger, a love that had begun with a ride to town for medicine, but had become the greatest healing of all.